Hello, students. This is a summary of the essay Commonwealth Literature Does Not Exist. In the year 1983, when Rushdie was invited to speak at the English Studies Seminar at Cambridge, a lady from the British Council assured him that for the purpose of the seminar, English studies are taken to include Commonwealth literature. Rushdie notes with surprise that at all other times these two would be strictly kept apart, but for the sake of the seminar, they want to include Commonwealth literature in English studies. A few weeks later, a literature don who spoke to Rushdie said, I quote, as a Commonwealth writer, you would probably find that this is a kind of liberty, certain advantage in occupying a position of periphery, unquote. In a British magazine, interviews of Shiva Naipal, Buchi Mcheta, and Salman Rushdie were published. In the interview, Salman Rushdie said that he found the term Commonwealth literature strange, unhelpful, and even distasteful. Even Buchi Mcheta and Shiva Naipal expressed the same opinions. The interview appeared under the headline Commonwealth Writers, but don't call them that. Rushdie says by this time, Commonwealth was becoming unpopular with him. The countries of South Africa and Pakistan, which did not belong to the Commonwealth nations, had their literature in Commonwealth literature. Britain is a member of Commonwealth nations, but its literature is not included under Commonwealth category. So, such discrepancies were there in the term Commonwealth literature. Then Rushdie attended a conference at Sweden. There he spoke to the Australian poet Randolph Stowe, the West Indian writer Wilson Harris, Gugi Watiago from Kenya, and the Canadian novelist Aretha Van Herk. At the conference, Rushdie became aware that their differences were more significant than their similarities. He felt that it was also impossible to say what the term Commonwealth meant. Rushdie wondered what Anita Desai, who is a writer of the novel of sensibilities, could have in common with Marxist Gugi Watiago, who is an overtly political writer. To Rushdie, he gives a definition of Commonwealth literature. To him, Commonwealth literature is that body of writing created in English by persons who are not white Britons or Irish or citizens of United States of America. It was not clear to Rushdie whether black Americans could be part of this group. He was also not sure whether it included the citizens of Commonwealth who wrote in languages other than English, for example, Hindi, Marathi, etc. So, Rushdie feels that Commonwealth literature was not only a ghetto but an exclusive ghetto. The effect of creating a ghetto is to change the meaning of the far broader term English literature. English literature meant the literature of the English language for Rushdie. Now it has been reduced to something narrower, topographical, nationalistic, possibly even racially segregationist. So, after creating this branch called Commonwealth literature, Rushdie feels that the broad term English literature has been narrowed down. As he surveyed the category of Commonwealth literature, it occurred to him that it is a chimera. The word has, of course, come to mean an unreal, monstrous creature of the imagination. In classical mythology, Chimera was a monster. It had a head of a lion, body of a goat, and a serpent's tail. It could exist only in dreams. It is composed of things which do not exist in real world. So for Rushdie, Commonwealth literature is like a chimera which does not exist at all. The dangers of unleashing such a phantom into the groves of literature are manifold. There is the effect of creating a ghetto. It will create a ghetto mentally among some of its occupants. Ghetto mentality is a mindset informed by poverty and fear. The creation of a false category can lead to excessively narrow and sometimes misleading readings of some of the artists it includes. The existence or putative existence of the beast distracts the attention from what is actually worth looking at. So, this category of Commonwealth literature can lead to some dangerous attitudes. That is what he means. English is by now the world language. It has achieved this status partly as a result of physical colonization of a quarter of the globe by the British. It was given to the colonized countries along with mission schools, trunk roads, and cricket rules. So, here Rushdie means to say that English came to India or any colonized country along with other civilizing tools such as school, road, cricket, etc. Whether it is a gift of the British colonizers is still ambiguous. The present day preeminence is not solely and not even primarily the result of British legacy. It is also the effect of the primacy of the United States of America in the affairs of the world. Here, Rushdie points out that for the growth of English language, not only is Britain responsible, but United States of America also has a powerful role in making it the lead language. This second impetus towards English could be termed a kind of linguistic neo-colonialism or just plain pragmatism on the part of the world's governments and in educationists according to one's point of view. In Rushdie's point of view, it is not necessary to take up anti colonial or post colonial cudgels against English always. So, Rushdie says we need not object or reject English because it has become a part of our life. He feels that those people who were once colonized by the language are now rapidly remaking it, domesticating it, and becoming more and more relaxed about the way they use it. English language has an enormous flexibility and size. So, they are carving out large territories for themselves within its frontiers. So, English has become part of our day to day life, and people are becoming more and more used to it. And English also has the additional advantage of flexibility and a large vocabulary. Then, particularly in the case of India, English has some roles to play. That is what Rushdie says next. In the case of India, the debate about the appropriateness of English in post British India has been raging ever since 1947. This debate has meaning only for the older generation. Whether we should continue with English education or not was an old debate. Now times have changed. The children of independent India do not think of English as being irredeemably tainted by its colonial provenance. Now, the present generation does not consider English as a foreign language. They use it as an Indian language, as one of the tools they have to hand. There is also an interesting north south divide in Indian attitudes towards English. In the north, in the so called Hindi belt, where the capital Delhi is located, it is possible to think of Hindi as a future national language. But in South India, which is at present suffering from attempts of the central government to impose Hindi language on it, the resentment of Hindi is far greater than of English. Rushdie has spent quite some time in South India, and so he is convinced that English is an essential language in India, not only because of its technical vocabularies and the international communication which it makes possible, but also simply to permit two Indians talk to each other in a tongue which neither party hates. Like, for example, if a Kannadiga wants to communicate with a Tamilian, they are using English as the common language. So they don't have problem with using English in South India. Indian society and Indian literature have a complex and developing relationship with the English language. This kind of post colonial dialectic is propounded as one of the unifying factors in Commonwealth literature, but clearly does not exist, or at least is far more peripheral to the problems of literatures in Canada, Australia, even South Africa. Every time one examines the general theories of Commonwealth literature, they come apart in our hands. English literature has its Indian branch, or the Indian literature. There is no incompatibility here. If history creates complexities, let us not try to simplify them. English is an Indian literary language. Thanks to writers like Tagore, Desani, Chaudhary, Mulkraj Anand, Rajarao, Anita Desai, and others, it has quite a pedigree. It is true that English language literatures of England, Ireland, and the USA are older than the Indian. So, it is possible that common literature is no more than an ungainly name for the world's younger English literatures. It would be relatively unimportant misnomer. The term is not used simply to describe or even misdescribe, but also to divide. It permits academic institutions, publishers, and critics, and even the readers to dump a large segment of English literature into a box and then more or less ignore it. At best, what is called Commonwealth literature is positioned below English literature proper. It places English literature at the center and the rest of the world at the periphery. It is very depressing that such a view persists in the study of literature long after it has been discarded in the study of everything else English. So here Rushdie points out that having a separate category called Commonwealth literature has no benefits. The nations who come under this category, the literatures which come under this category, do not have anything in common. So it is a narrow term which is going to restrict our growth. It will only lead to a ghetto mentality. It will only lead to marginalizing the various differences that we have, so diversity that we have. So in Rushdie's opinion, it's better not to have this classification called Commonwealth literature. We will discuss next part of the summary in the next video. Thank you.